Hello and welcome to another episode of our Accelerated ID series. My name is Shawntay and I'm going to be your host for our session today. Today, we're going to be talking about instructional design essentials. So if you are an aspiring instructional designer, this session is definitely for you because we're going to be breaking down some of those essential things that you need to know as an instructional designer. We're going to be introducing you to adult learning theory, what it is and how that differs from pedagogy. We're going to talk about some design considerations whenever you are developing learning experiences for adult learners. And then we're going to talk to you or introduce you to a couple of instructional system design models. So that's what we're covering today. If you are a teacher, if you've gone to college, you've definitely heard the term pedagogy. You hear pedagogical reasons, you hear pedagogy, right? You hear that word a lot. Well, as you start making that transition into instructional design and you're shifting your focus from a K through 12 environment or a university environment, you're going to start hearing adult learning theory or andragogy. And as you can see, if we break it out in Greek, that andragogy simply means man leading, or we could shift that to adult leading, and pedagogy means child leading. And there are definitely some differences in how we create learning experiences for children or students in K through 12 settings or students in college settings versus how we create learning experiences for our adult learners in our corporate settings or our academic settings where we're working with colleagues and professionals, right? Definitely some differences. We're going to talk about that for just a little bit, but I want to point out that there is a difference. One time I was working with an aspiring instructional designer who was telling me about her challenges getting hired as an instructional designer. She was a classroom teacher. And she explained that in her last interview that she told her hiring manager that there were no differences, that she would create learning experiences exactly the same for her adult learners as she would the children in her classroom. Now, while there are definitely overlaps in some of the strategies that we use for adult learners and our students in our classrooms, there are also differences. And hiring managers want to hear about the differences. They don't want to think that, oh, so somebody's going to teach my staff exactly as they would a child. So that kind of gets interpreted as treat them like children. So it's important that you are able to explain the differences in how we structure learning experiences for adults versus students, even though there are some overlaps. You just want to be able to hold that conversation. So when we're talking about andragogy or adult learning theory, we often think about Malcolm Knowles and his 4 principles of adult learning. So Malcolm says is that the learner wants to be involved. And I want you to put yourself, as I'm describing this, I want you to be thinking about yourself in your learning experiences and decide for yourself, is this true or is this not true? Or do I like something else, right? So Malcolm says that adults want to be involved in that learning process. They want to share their experiences. And as adults, we have vast experiences that we can bring into the conversation. We have different backgrounds. We've worked in different places. We've encountered different challenges in those workplaces. So we have a lot of things or a lot of experiences to bring into the conversation about whatever it is that we are learning, right? They also need to understand, why is this important to me? How am I going to use this in my job today? Or how is this going to help me in the future? Adults also want to do problem solving. So they want to get in and evaluate scenarios, create solutions, discuss things, argue about things, right? So it's just kind of a different experience whenever you are in a room with adult learners. So if any of that resonates with you and what you prefer in your learning experience, go ahead and drop that in the chat for me. Do you want to be involved? Do you want to bring your experiences into the conversation? Do you need to understand why this is relevant and important to you? And do you like problem solving or getting involved in some different discussions and things like that? I would love to hear from you. All right. So, based on those things that we just talked about, let's talk about some andragogy design assumptions or some adult learning design considerations. So, with our adults, they want to know why they need to know something. So, sometimes you hear this called YFM, right? What's in it for me? So, you'll see that acronym quite a bit as an instructional designers. So, we have to explain that to them. Well, maybe at the beginning of a learning experience that we're designing, we might say, and the benefits of this are XYZ. Or by the time you have completed this session, you're going to know how to do X, right? So we can even tie in our learning objectives that we create to help create that relevancy for them. And then we have adult learners want to experientially learn. That means, again, that they want to be involved in that learning process. They want to share their experiences. They want to be hands-on. So this is nothing like what many of us experienced in college. Now, things may be different today. It's been a while since I have been in college, but whenever I was in college or even in high school, I would sit in the classroom and my professor or my teacher would stand at the front of the room and lecture to me anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes or even an hour and a half some nights, right? So that was an experiential. That was a lecture and I was doing my best to sit there in that learning experience and stay engaged. Now, sometimes I had some really amazing teachers and some really amazing professors who created more of that dialogue and brought the students into the discussion or gave us projects that we had to noodle on. And that would be more into that experiential piece. Now, in our K through 12 settings, we do see experiential, right? We do see a lot of hands-on activities. It's just the way that those are set up and the level of control by the student or the participant is different between adults and children. Now, number 3 here is adults approach learning as problem solving. So again, they like to be in the content, really kind of trying to make meaning of the concepts, thinking about, okay, if this was set up this way, what would that outcome be? Or how could I take this and apply it to what I'm doing today? So we really want to provide some of those opportunities for them to problem solve and create solutions where they can pull from their rich experiences, their backgrounds, the different situations that they've encountered in their workplaces, and bring that into our learning experiences because we learn from one another, not just from the facilitator. So if I have any experienced instructional designers here right now, you all have some really amazing experiences that you could be dropping into this chat to help strengthen some of this conversation, right? Because your experiences are different. So we could pull on that or pull from that to make this conversation even better about our design considerations. All right, and the last one here, this last design consideration is that adults learn best when a topic has immediate value. That is so true, right? There is something about needing to learn something now versus learning something knowing that I'm not going to be able to use this for another year or 6 months. So sometimes in organizations, we see that they roll out training. Maybe they roll out training 60 days or 90 days before they implement something. And then by the time that new something has been implemented, people have totally forgotten what it is that they learned. And so then they need that refresher, right? So it's really important to time learning experiences as much as we can, as much as is in our control, but we want to time those with when they're going to need to use that. So if I was going to launch a new training about using agile project management, for instance, because we're going to get a new project management tool. Maybe we're getting Jira or something like that. If I was going to roll out Scrum Agile and how to use Jira to manage our projects in this Scrum Agile methodology, then I would want to time that training with pretty close to the time that we were going to implement this so that people would have some urgency to learn this and then immediately have some practice opportunities with the new tools and the new practices. Okay. So it is very helpful to time things as much as we can. Now, the reality is that sometimes these things are just out of our control. We just have to go with it. And then in those cases, maybe we create some support resources, like a one pager or some sort of infographic that people can take back to their desk or that we could distribute via email so that they do have that natural refresher. All right, so design principles for adult learning. We want to explain what and why things are being taught, so that what's in it for me, just like we did at the beginning of this session today. We talked about, so here are the three buckets that we're going to cover in this accelerated ID session. You want to include task-oriented and experiential methods. So as much as possible, you want to engage that adult learner, give them different tasks to do, give them different problems to solve, create opportunities for people to weigh in and be a part of the conversation. You also can create self-directed learning. Now, so self-directed learning doesn't just mean like, oh, I'm going to get in a self-paced course and I can decide when I'm going to do what, when. But we can create choice within our learning experiences. So maybe there is an activity that they can choose from option A, or they can choose from option B. So this allows them to have some control and some ownership over that learning experience. So that would fall into this self-directed bucket. And then again, we want to factor in the learner's backgrounds and experiences. So even all the way back whenever we are still in the analysis phase, which we'll talk about in just a second, we need to be thinking about who are our learners in this learning experience. Are they brand new managers? Are they senior VPs who are leading teams of 100, right? So what are their backgrounds? What's their level of experience? Because we're going to design the learning experience around that. We're going to design our conversations and our breakout discussions around the level that they have, knowing that their challenges are different between a senior VP and a first-time manager, right? A first-time manager might need to know how to just give feedback or how to move away from being somebody's buddy at work to now being their boss, where a senior VP is doing, $1 million budgets, or they're doing terminations, or they need to be more inclusive leaders. So their needs are different, and we need to know what those are so that we can design around it and then pull those conversations into our discussions. And then again, just make that content relevant and applicable so that they know, like, oh, yes, I need to be here. That's another thing that's different between children and adults, is that children cannot opt out of a learning experience. They don't have choice in what is being taught. Every state has state standards that the teachers are responsible for educating those students on. Well, adults are different. They can choose to participate in learning experiences. And if they get into that learning experience and they find that it's not relevant or meaningful to them, they can opt out, just like you, right? So if you are not happy with this learning experience, you could just click X and just like log out and you're done, because this needs to be relevant and applicable to where you are in your learning experience as an aspiring instructional designer. All right, so let's shift out of adult learning theory and get into instructional design systems. There are two instructional design systems that I just want to give you a quick glimpse or introduction to. I wouldn't be surprised if you already know what these are. So let's do a quick run through of ADDIE. So ADDIE is a systematic process that is often used by instructional designers to create learning experiences. So it's systematic, meaning we have phases here. It's a repeatable process. So ADDIE stands for Analysis, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. And it always stands for that. That's why it's repeatable, right? So as an instructional designer, you will go, if you're using the ADDIE model, and you will often see ADDIE mentioned on job postings, you're going to go through an analysis phase. You're going to do the design, you'll do the development, you're going to implement, and you are going to evaluate training, right? So in the analysis phase, this is where you are collecting information such as the requirements. You're identifying who is the audience. You're getting information about What medium is this going to be delivered in? Is this going to be on our learning management system? Is this going to be delivered live? Is this going to be a virtual instructor led? Is it in the classroom? Right? So all of that is happening in the analysis phase. This is where you're doing your scoping meetings. This is where you're completing your training needs analysis. You're meeting with your subject matter experts. You're interviewing them to mine for gold and get all of those really important nuggets out of their brain so that you can create that learning experience. Then in design, you're going to take all of that information that you collected and you are going to organize that information. This is where you're going to be thinking about how to chunk that information to really maximize learning. You're going to put in some engagement strategies or identify some engagement strategies. You're going to be thinking about, ooh, how do I reduce learning loss here? What are some strategies that I can pull in? So you might finalize your learning objectives in this phase. You might create a storyboard or a course blueprint. You might script. You might start to identify what some assessment questions would be. Then in the development phase, this is where you're actually going to build. So maybe you build the e-learning lesson in Storyline 360 or in Rise or in Captivate, whatever tool your organization is going to use. Or maybe you create the instructional video, right? So this is where you actually compile all of those pieces and you create a product that can either be delivered live in a classroom, in a webinar, or implemented or launched on a learning management system. Now, whenever we talk about implement, that just simply means that we're launching it. So we're putting it into practice. It could be the pilot or it could be the actual V.1 of whatever that is. And it could be implemented live in the classroom, virtual instructor led, or a learning management system. Sometimes it's just even put onto a web page and just hyperlinked or on YouTube, right? So there are a lot of different ways that can be managed. And then evaluate is where we step back and after something has been implemented and we evaluate. How well is that performing? What kind of reactions are we getting from our learners? Taking a look at any assessment questions. Are there any assessment questions where a large portion of our participants are missing that question? You can evaluate it and go, oh, well, that's not written very well. Maybe that needs to be more clearly written. Or maybe we find that we didn't do a good job of covering in the content. So we need to strengthen that portion of the content in order for participants to do better on that question, right? So evaluate is you can evaluate a lot of different data points from the experience to the number of users taking the training to the people that are completing it all the way through to the end, assessment questions. Are there any issues that need to be addressed? So all of that. Okay. And then the other model, which is pretty new to the scene this past decade, which is SAM, the successive approximation model. You might have seen the book Leaving ADDIE for SAM. So SAM is more of an agile development model. So this one is really about creating something quickly, assessing whether it's working, making some improvements. So they call this iterative. If you are familiar with agile project management at all, you'll know that we work in iteration. So it's like you create something that has value, you get it out to market, and then you iterate and you improve it. So with SAM, we still have the preparation phase, which is where we're doing the analysis. And then when we get into the design phase, you can see that there is this cycle that's happening. So you design, you prototype, you review, and you get some feedback. You take that feedback, you apply it, you design, you prototype, right? So you get something that is more close to what your business stakeholder is looking for there in the design phase before you actually move into that development phase. So then when you get into development, it's still develop, implement, and evaluate. So you'll see that there is some correlation to ADDIE. There are some similarities to ADDIE, but this is just different in the sense that it's agile and you're getting feedback earlier and more often so that you have less feedback and less rework on the back end. So both of these models are very popular. It's worth it for you to get to know both of them as an inspiring instructional designer. In fact, one of our accelerator coaches in our instructional design and tech accelerator system and certificate program just went to work for Michael Allen Interactions. And Michael Allen is the founder of SAM for everyone that's here. Personally, I'm still a big fan of ADDIE, but I treat ADDIE more in an iterative, um, more as an iterative process than the traditional. You go through all the phases and then you iterate. So I do stop in the design phase and I get feedback. I do edits before we get all the way through to the end. If you want to learn a little bit more about adult learning theory or ADDIE or SAM, then I highly recommend that you download our Ultimate Instructional Design Starter Kit. This is designed with the aspiring instructional designer in mind. It's absolutely free. It's filled with a lot of important information that aspiring instructional designers need to know that falls into this instructional design essential category. And you could go to acceleratedid.com/kit to download this. And then for all of our aspiring instructional designers who want to take a much deeper dive, you want to accelerate your instructional design development, then I encourage you to check out our instructional design and tech accelerator system that has a really robust curriculum. It has live coaching, growth oriented feedback, and a really awesome accelerator community. And you can check that out at acceleratedid.com/system.